So we'll get started then. Well, to begin with, could you please introduce yourself and tell us about your current and past roles with AABA?
My name is Lisa Liu. I was one of the founding members of ABBA and founding member of the board as well. I'm currently on the advisory board to ABBA.
Sorry, I'm going to mute myself so when you're speaking, only you are on camera and I'm not, if that's okay. Um, could you tell us a bit about some of the highlights of AABA? For example, some of the events, accomplishments, some of litigation.
I think when ABBA was first founded, we were concerned about how to dialogue about the issues that were facing lawyers and specifically as those issues relate to Asian American lawyers, and to provide opportunities. Um, and so we engaged in a number of activities that were designed to help um, develop those dialogues and those conversations. And I think we were quite successful in doing so. Let me know if you want me to go into examples of
Yes, please feel free to go on any examples and we can always play around with it.
Yeah, so one of the early issues we identified were number of Asian American lawyers serving as judges. There were very few at the time. In addition, the number of Asian American lawyers who were in the partnership ranks at law firms. And then also just speaking out generally about issues that impact Asian Americans generally in the community in Arizona and in the United States. And so developing information to disseminate, to inform, and to educate, those were important aspects. And then once we got that going, then finding the funding to support some of the activities that we were engaging in. And then that led to us establishing scholarships to help educate new lawyers who can help with these particular issues.
So building on that, you mentioned some of the challenges. You mentioned that ABBA has gone through some challenges. Do you mind sharing more about that? Some of the challenges that ABBA has faced in the past and present, and what does ABBA do to address those challenges that the Asian American lawyers face?
I'm not sure ABBA itself has experienced some of the challenges. ABBA recognizes the challenges experienced personally by Asian American lawyers. And in trying to advance those issues and those dialogues, ABBA had a lot of allies, people willing to help us explore them and help us figure out the structure that would be well suited for us. We had many judges in the early days come speak with us, telling us what the system was like. One of the things that you always have to do is always learn the rules and figure out how to play with those rules, and or once you get in, figure out how you can change the rules if they're not equitable. And so we had judges that who helped us learn those. We had other lawyers who were very willing to serve as allies with us and talk about what needed to change. So like learning, being a part of various workshops to educate lawyers on how to apply to be a judge. In Maricopa County, it's merit selection, how to prepare for the interviews, how to learn about the vacancies, because part of that was also part of the issue, right? How do you inform people of those opportunities? And then learning very early in your career that if you want to get on the bench, keeping a journal of the matters that you worked on so you can be in a position to actually fill out the very, very lengthy application. And then talking to practicing judges to see what it's like being on the bench, getting that information. Because, people have an idea of what it's like without really knowing what it's like. So very helpful there. And the law firms listening to us when we said, hey, how are you doing your hiring, your recruitment, and talking with them. I think um, for ABBA, we look at the number of Asian American judges on the bench. We look at the number of Asian American partners in large law firms, and the growth is tremendous. So I think for ABBA itself, it's been tremendous success.
So, could you tell us a bit about the membership of AABA? What does it look like? How many members are there? Are there mostly lawyers, students, non-lawyers? Because in the process, we learned that you can be, which I personally did not know, that you could be a member of AABA if you're not a lawyer. So, could you tell us a bit about that?
Um, yeah, from the very early days, we made sure we did our outreach as far as we could. And because our numbers were relatively low at the time. I can't remember, but I think when we first started, the number of licensed attorneys in the state of Asian American descent was like 60. The number is much higher. But we had corporations, we had non-Asian lawyers, we had law students, we had everybody who believed in what we were doing, who were willing to be dues-paying members. It wasn't like, here, just join, but they actually pay dues. And so it was amazing. I have to give a big shout out to APS at the time when we first started. APS and Herb Zinn in particular helped us with a lot of our early financial issues. They helped us do some printing and some mailing and things like that, and they were very much an ally for us. And then we got law students who many law students who were our early supporters are now very active members, within ABBA.
And we already talked about this a bit, but I was wondering, I know that ABBA has helped or has advocated for some policy changes in Arizona. I was wondering if you're familiar with those and if you could tell us about that.
Yeah, advocacy is different. I think individual members of
Mhm.
ABBA advocated, but ABBA itself can only inform, right? And so we leave advocacy to individuals after we provide the platform to inform people about what the laws can do and not do. In the very early days, before we even became a formal organization, the English only amendment to the Constitution, ABBA members worked on talking about what it was. Now, we weren't a formal entity yet. We were still individuals who had gathered to talk about it. When there were SB 1070, we talked about the impact to the community, and there were lots of different interests within the community, and we permitted platforms to talk about it. We were careful as an organization that we didn't impact legislation or an election. Same thing happened later with another bill that had passed and was awaiting the governor's signature. The impact to because other groups were talking about boycotting Arizona. So we provided platforms to talk about it. We individual members of ABBA went and talked about whether or not, for example, the National Asian Bar Convention, which was then scheduled to be in Arizona, whether that would take place. So empowering our members with information for them to make the decision as to whether or not and how they would advocate is really important.
What about ABBA's role in the broader Arizona legal community? How do you see that? How do you envision ABBA's role being in the future or present?
Yeah, so networking is really important, right? Knowing who other people are, because you can't be insular. In order to be effective and to work well, you need to be part of the community. And so ABBA has always worked well with other affinity bars and with the state bar. And the affinity bars are quite a number of them. They're not just the ones that are minority focused. They include all the different interests, different bar associations, and working with them. And I think we've been pretty successful in doing that because once you know somebody, it's hard to just focus on how different they are. You focus on how you're so similar and how together you could accomplish the activities that will empower all of you.
On that same note, what would you like the greater is Arizona legal community to know about ABBA that you don't think it's commonly known?
We've been around now since 92. So it's about what, 33 years. So a number of people know who we are, know of us as a resource. Um, and even there's outreach to us if they need a lawyer who can speak a particular language to help with client representation or to assist with understanding some of the cultural norms if they have a party they're dealing with from another country. Right, so ABBA's been helpful there. ABBA also can connect with the community in Arizona and nationally as well, can bring back, share some perspectives, national perspectives here back in Arizona. I think just being a trusted resource is something we would like to continue to have the community know, especially the legal profession.
Perfect. Now a specific question. We've heard from other members and ponders that you'd be the best person to ask about the Giving Tree. Could you tell us about how did it start and what is it and what does it do?
So the Giving Tree, the book, was initially given to me by a work study supervisor when I was in college. And it talks about service and the greater good of service. And then in 1994, when Judge Thomas Tang was taking senior status, and we were contemplating, this was the State Bar Committee that I was on, contemplating on what we would use to honor Judge Tang's service and commitment to our community. And I'd made the observation that he has so many plaques, and we didn't need yet another plaque to give him. And I told him about how I felt when I received a copy of the book, The Giving Tree. And so we gave it to him, along with creating the Judge Tang writing competition at the time. We thought that that would be a good way to honor him. And I was pleasantly surprised when he called me and said he loved the book. He said he happened to have been reading it while at the airport. Oh, no, I'm sorry. No. He had read it, and then he saw a little boy at the airport reading the same book. And he engaged in dialogue with him and asked the boy what he thought the book was about. And they started a whole conversation about service, right? So here you have the senior status federal judge talking to a young boy about what it meant. So then when Ken Lee became a judge shortly after we had given him Judge Tang that book, we decided to create a version to give that book to every judge, right, that got on the bench, because at that time, if I can remember correctly, Judge Tang had passed away, so he could not present his message of giving, and he would always say, "To whom much is given, much is expected," and that's the message of the giving tree. So we started that with Judge Ken Lee. We decided to put it in a lucite case so it would travel with all the judges, and you will see we had to pay for every letter that was engraved, and we didn't have much of a budget. And so we did a lot of abbreviations. You look at that case, but so that's a traveling book. But every judge then gets the personal copy they get to keep. And Dr. Pearl Tang, Judge Tang's widow, very much his partner in advancing not just the medical profession where she was in, but helping advance the legal profession as well. She then inscribed the book, and she inscribed numerous copies for us. And unfortunately, she passed away several years ago, and we're, I think, down to like just one more copy of the book she inscribed. But it's given to every judge of the Asian American Bar Association that to remind them of that message of service and what it means to give.
Do you know who the last copy was given to?
Um, I could find out. I don't remember
Okay,
off the
it's
top of
okay.
my head.
Okay. So those are pretty much the questions that I have. I was gonna ask, and Nelia will jump in a second and have more questions. But is there any topics regarding ABBA that you would like to discuss that we haven't talked about?
I think ABBA is also a great um, training ground, right, for young lawyers to learn how to collect information, disseminate information. Also for public speaking skills. We have enough events where you have an MC, you have enough issues where you need to meet with leaders within the state to be able to talk about them. I found myself sort of cutting my teeth on a lot of those issues by my involvement with ABBA.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Lilia, would you like to jump in?
Yes. Okay. I was jotting down something she had just said that I thought was really, really interesting. And I think one of the things that we didn't actually know was this new nugget that I think is fascinating, that Judge Teng was actually reading the book at the airport and engaged with someone, and the fact that his wife had inscribed a few of the books. But let me ask, because I know I had asked Amanda about the family, I think it was called, actually it is a family picnic. One of the things, because we are doing the historical timeline, so I go a little bit further back. Last time we also learned about the casino night, the picnic as well, and a few more things. So one of the things we wanted to know was the family picnic. Was that the first event that started before the banquet? We were not sure what to put first, and I don't think we still have a definitive answer. There's a possibility that it was the picnic first that started because there was not enough funding in the beginning, and then we had the banquet. So just to make sure that we aligned on what we should put in terms of the timeline, what started first? Was it the casino, the family picnic? I know the banquets came after that. If you could help us just put that in perspective, that would be great, please.
Well, actually, I think the casino night came after.
Okay, so family picnic first, casino night after.
Yeah, and I think the family picnic and the banquet were around the same time. We were so small, right? At the time, there was a restaurant called Mr. C's. Um, Charlie Suey, who was an active member of the community, and his daughter, Catherine Suey, is, an ABBA member. We actually went to the back room of his restaurant. That was our first banquet. right? It was really small. I mean, we also did lunches. So let me start. We did lunches in Mr. C's restaurants, and this is where Judge Tang would bring other judges with him to come and sit with us and talk about issues. And I remember one time, I mean, it would be a table of 10. Judge Tang brought the federal judges, and we were quiet. And he said, "You don't have questions for the federal judges?" And we're like, um, because they were federal judges, right? And we held them on a pedestal. And he was like, "No, they're here to help, but you need to ask." Right? That's the one thing I learned very early. If you don't ask, they're not gonna know what they can do to help you, right? So we started with lunches. And they were monthly lunches, and you paid your own way. It was like, if you could show up, you could. If you didn't eat, if you couldn't, you didn't. And then we held, the banquets. And along the same time, we did the picnics. They were in the park. We brought our families because we all had young children. We were trying to figure out, like, how can you get together and still, balance everything. So it would be a Saturday afternoon, and then we would just bring our families along. We could always grill, and lots of we got to know each other well by doing those things. Um, and then eventually they grew, and then we grew out of Mr. C's back room. We had, probably 50 people by that point, and we're like, okay, we can't do that anymore. And then we went to other larger restaurants to do this. But along the way, what had happened was part of what is now known as spring training for lawyers. I can't remember what it's called now, but there used to be something called the Minority Bar Convention. And that started in 92 as well, I think, 92, 93. A very big sponsor back then was the Arizona Community Foundation. A woman had passed away, no children, asked her lawyer to whom she should donate her funds. And if my recollection was, she had $6 million. Her lawyer advised her to donate to the Arizona Community Foundation. She was a Latina. The Arizona Community Foundation realized that there was very little giving among minority communities, and then started on this campaign of, if you would create an endowment at the community foundation would match every dollar with 50 cents. And they started going around to the Minority Bar Convention and said, let's do that. And I went back to the Asian bar and I said, oh my goodness, look at this tremendous funding we could get, right? And so that's how we started doing casino night. We established an endowment at the Arizona Community Foundation. We went to China Doll Restaurant, which was on 7th Avenue and Osborne, I think, the largest Chinese restaurant then. Saturday evening, had all the back room. We raised quite a bit of money with George Chen was a law student at the time. Amazing how much work he put into that as well as a bunch of other law students and AABA members. Created a lot of raised a lot of funds, and because it was matched by the community foundation, 50 cents on the dollar, that just kind of upped our amount. Judge Rosa Mraz was not a judge then, but she was a member, and before going to law school, she was a CPA. I was the treasurer at the time, and I remember Rosa calling me and saying, Lisa, this is not how you keep books. I said, I know, I keep them like you do a checking book. Here's what I have in, here's what I have out. she said, you know what? Let's do this more professionally. Let's just do this the way a CPA would do it. So she was the first treasurer for AABA to kind of get our books in order, and then worked with the community foundation on what it is we needed. And we needed to raise at least 100,000 to get the endowment going in order to do scholarships. And Rosa got, I think by the third year, she said, we're there. We got 100,000 in our third year. We didn't do any more casino nights, but then the fundraising from our annual banquet was what we put towards that. And then there are some anonymous people who would make yearly donations to AABA to go to the scholarship fund. Um, so, so all of those things happened at the same time. And the picnic has grown so much. We got out of the park, then we got into homes. I know Barry Wong hosted it for a number of years in his home. And then Judge Mraz said, you know, she could host it in her home. And that became the gathering place, if you may. And unfortunately, with the her untimely passing, her spouse Rob has carried on her legacy and continued to host AABA at their house for the picnic. And it's turned from a spring picnic to an annual picnic that's usually now later in the year.
Wow, awesome. That was really good. I mean, it's really amazing how all these different pieces are tying in together. So, okay, so that's good. And one of the other question I had asked was, you know, are there any major challenges you had previously that you feel like has now been resolved? And if so, like if you look back historically, in the beginning, we struggled with this. I know Amanda talked about like having to photocopy and fax things, and I know not that kind, but like just overall, you know, these were the struggles that, you know, over the time has been resolved, and this is how it's benefited the legal community and ABBA and everyone else involved.
You know, so very early on when we first got together, there were a small group of people. It was Paul Tang, Barry Wong, Bob Yen, and I'm missing another name. Together with Judge Tang, gathered us at a local hotel and said, "Hey, should we form an Asian American Bar Association?" And there were various voices as to whether or not we needed an Asian American bar. Some difficult conversations there. In the end, some people said, yes, we should. And we did. And we recognized that some people did not want to become members. And we had to work through that. And I think today, you know, we're comfortable that if you don't think ABBA is for you, you don't need to be a member. But there are enough people who believe that ABBA serves a purpose, serves as a resource, and having a group that will help you advance some of those common interests is very helpful. So going from the early days and just trying to figure out, do we need another bar association? What is it that the state bar isn't providing that we need ABBA to do, to where it is now established? It's known as a resource. It's young people know they're welcome. And ABBA does so many social functions today that it's so easy for young people to say, I'm now just, you know, I'm now practicing, brand new graduate. How do I get to know other lawyers? They know that's, you know, someone outside of, you know, their place of employment that they could talk to. When we get new people who move into town and they're trying to figure out, how do I connect with the community? How do I connect with the legal profession? They know ABBA is available for that. It's also a place for people to learn how to, you know, learn about issues and disseminate the information. It's yet another training ground for a lot of people outside of their workplace. So it's well established. I think so we've we evolved and we matured.
Excellent. Okay, so that's really good. And I most of the questions has so far been answered. One of the questions that was well, you can just speak to it. One of the two things I gathered from the last interview was that some Asian, like you mentioned, are not very much into participating and they prefer, instead of networking, I can do this by merit, right? And we don't need, we're not trying to, I'm not trying to ask you to convince people to come on, but how do you speak to those individuals that are like, yeah, I don't need networking? And the reason I'm asking is that at BLI, the last BLI meeting was all about networking and how lawyers sometimes, young lawyers in particular, think they don't need it, it's boring, it's too mundane, they hate it. So in this particular case, ABBA is such a great resource, and you know, and I've really enjoyed working on this project. So if you're to speak to like a young lawyer, you know, what would you say that is more like, yeah, I'm gonna do this on merit. I don't need to connect with anyone in my community. I don't do that. I don't need the connection. What would that message be?
Yeah, you know, and so some of the early conversations were that somehow by forming an Asian American Bar Association, you were saying that we were lesser than, and that this was affirmative action, and they could do it on their own merits. I think being a part of the Asian American Bar Association and doing the things that we're doing is merit. Um, Somehow trying to suppress how you identify or how people perceive you, I don't think, at least for me, it's not how I live my life, right? I'm perceived as a foreigner. No, and Bob Yen will tell you, I think he's like fourth generation in Arizona, and he's still perceived as foreign, right? So how do you address the issues where you're perceived that way? And I think ABBA helps you develop those tools and the education and the facts to do so. Um, I always believe that merit is more than your test grade. Merit is more than whether or not you did well in law school or grade school. Merit is building a team with skill sets that will help your client solve issues. And you know, we all know this. There are some people who are great at research but don't have people skills. Then there are people who are great at making their case, right, in front of a jury or a judge, right? We select them based on those skills, right? So how do you tell that story? So I think you have when you embrace the fact that I'm going to be perceived this way as a foreigner, and the fact that part of my identity is being Asian, I bring all of that skill set. I bring all of that experience in how I practice. And I don't see how that is somehow the not merit, right? Because I'm not, no one's lowering any standards for me just because I'm an ABBA member. If you think you could be successful, um, and not be a member of, you know, an affinity bar, I don't have a problem with that. I don't force anyone into thinking that they have to. I think what you do is when you network, you realize that you have to network with a wide range of people with connections in many different ways, with abilities to open doors into various communities. And if you could do that without joining an affinity bar, fine, fine. And that's why people join, you know, various clubs. I mean, I belong to a lot of other organizations as well, and it's not just ABBA. So I belong to various groups that have interests that are my interests, that are helpful to me. I have a mothers group, right? I've had a mothers group, a different mothers groups ever since my child was born. I had one group that was just mothers who were lawyers, right? In 1991. I today have a mothers group and there are maybe 3 lawyers, but others are not. We belong to many different groups that share your interests, and whatever those interests are for you, go for it.
That was very well said. And of course, belonging in all the different groups. I didn't know there were groups like that, but thank you for sharing that. I jotted that down for my own purpose, but and also for ABBA. And finally, one last question was the collaborative bar. And do you still collaborate with them? And are there any current issues you're collaborating on in this time frame? As we speak. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that, if you do participate in that at all. If you just discuss the collaborative bar a little bit. And I think there are 11, I think it's 11. I don't have that note with me at the moment. I think there are 11 total.
Yeah, I'm not a good person to talk about
Okay,
the formal structure of that. I think you spoke to Amanda. I think she's
yes.
a better. George Chen is also a good one to speak about that because it's also not only on the Arizona side, it's also on the national side. They're heavily involved. When I was doing it actively, we were doing it informally. We met on a regular basis with Los Abogados, at the time, the H.B. Daniels Bar, and the Native American Bar had not been formed yet. But we then had outreach to Native American lawyers to get their insight on various things. So we did it informally. We used to do joint letters to the Judicial Nominating Committee on behalf of diverse candidates. We would get together on issues, uh, legal issues that would impact all of us. But I wasn't part of that formal process of the collaborative bar. But I think it's a great idea.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't explain the question well. So, Amanda did speak about it at length, but I wanted you to just add more to it. So, for just mentioned that you would send out letters, joint letters, on issues. Were there any other things that you did collaboratively that you would like to share with us?
So, in addition to looking on issues, we collaborated quite a bit on the Minority Bar Convention. That was done by all the collaborative bars before the state bar became involved in it. It was not a state bar activity. We did all the programming for it. We also, I remember one that was a little contentious was working with the law school on diverse faculty. And that was done by the collaborative bar. I'm trying to remember. So we did the English only. We did SB 1070. We did diversity within the law school faculty. We did the judicial appointments. We did the workshops. But so that was all done by the bars collaborating together, and by a state bar committee. It was not a formal state bar activity until about, I want to say, 15 years ago. So those were the early days of the collaboration.
Okay. Any recent collaboration like in recent times, anything going on? I know that there was a time that one of the smaller bars had sent out a message and you were able to spread it. I think that was the Armenian bar had sent out a message. I think that was the information we gathered the last time. Are there any other recent major events you've collaborated on?
It's harder for me to speak to that because I'm not.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah, I'm not in leadership anymore with AABA. I'm old enough now to be an advisor.
I like it. Okay, that's good. And finally, is there anything else that we haven't touched upon that you would like for us to, that I mean, is there anything else at all that you would like to add, mention, um, just talk about before we end the call? Anything else at all?
Yeah, I mentioned Dr. Pearl Tang earlier, right? Because not only was she an integral part of working with Judge Tang on trying to improve the legal profession, what she did in her own right in public health is so important. And I think it's very important for people to remember the leaders um, in the areas that we now take for granted. And I always made a point of telling her story whenever we presented the Judge Tang Writing Competition Awards at the State Bar during the Minority Bar Convention. People don't realize that she was the one who taught migrant workers how to sterilize baby formula without both water and heat, right? She was the one that got the federal grant because she saw the infant mortality rate was so high. She had a theory as to why Arizona had perhaps the highest infant mortality rate in the country. She got a grant to study it, and it's because of her work that the Pap smear is now part of an annual well woman's visit, and how then Arizona's mortality rate got to a point where it was like the lowest in the country. I may be off on that just a little bit, but much lower. Um, and she also, when we talk about skill set, right, to work with your clients, in public health, many of her clients were Spanish speaking. And she told me that it was really difficult having to wait to get an interpreter. And often, by the time she got one, it was during lunchtime. And she said, I wanted to be able to take lunch, but I also wanted to be able to understand what my patients were telling me. So she went to Phoenix College and learned Spanish, right? She learned Spanish so that she, in her job, could communicate effectively with her patients. And that's what I use as an example when people say, oh, well, you do this, it's all, affirmative action stuff. It's being effective in your job. And she did this in the early 70s, right? And she also told me how when she found out how much the men were making and how she was making so much less, she had to go and say, well, excuse me, I'm doing the same work, if not more. And she advocated for herself and got a salary increase. So the whole thing about equal pay for equal work, she did that way before, the Equal Pay Act, right? So she was one of these advocates. And I always tell her story because I think it's important for people to know what she did to blaze the trail for all of us, that, things that we take for granted, but how she was this tremendous advocate for herself and the community. And we can't forget that. We can't forget to tell their stories.
Very good. Thank you. I actually like that. Let me turn this back on. That was very, very good because sometimes we think about it one side. I think that really ties in the fact that, ABBA is it's open. It's not just lawyers. Look at what these other people who were, our members have actually accomplished, and overall it helps because, of course, women benefit from that. Other people have benefited from that. And I think that's really, really great. And thank you so much for sharing that part with us. I don't know if
But let
Luan
me share
has.
one more.
Yes, yes, please
The
do. Please
other
do.
ABBA member I publicly talk about is Tony Ching. And, Ann Ching, his daughter now teaches at the ASU Law School. But Tony was the first Solicitor General for the state of Arizona. Gave up tenure at a law school to come back to serve as Solicitor General. But before then, he was with Waldef. He was with the Hawaiian Legal Defense Fund. He argued so many cases at the Supreme Court that won rights that we take for granted, right? Equal protection, the ability for women to get credit in their own name, right? A lot of that, he and Ruth Bader Ginsburg were contemporaries. They worked on similar cases and advanced them. Tony wasn't able to take the bar exam at the time he graduated from law school because he wasn't a U.S. citizen at the time. The cases he won later on were used to overturn the rule in Connecticut about being a U.S. citizen in order to take the bar exam, right? All these cases, people don't realize that were won by these pioneers, these leaders, and they benefit all of us, right? And Tony used to talk to me about public service. He won these cases not in private practice. He was, Ed Maldef, the Mexican American Legal Defense Fund, the Hawaiian Legal Aid Society. These are cases that he won that we don't think about and we just take for granted. And so these are stories we need to tell again, over and over again.
I didn't know that. As an immigrant, I mean, my ear just stood up immediately. I did not know that. That's really, really great to know. So one of the things that we will do when putting this together is while highlighting it, just put all these other people also into perspective. Because sometimes we think, okay, this is what this person is and this is what they've done, but there are other things they've done that we actually don't know how down the road it's had such a huge impact. So thank you so much for sharing that with us.
And if you ever get a chance, you should have Ann Ching talk about her father's cases.
Oh, I was, yeah, definitely. I
Supreme Court
personally
cases.
would love to. Personally, would love to talk to her. Yeah, I would definitely shoot an email to her just to get more information. Of course, I'm in the process of converting some amazing floppy disk that I got, and just to grab information. And while I'm waiting to do that, I would definitely also reach out as well. I know the banquet is coming up, and Luan and I are gonna be there. I'll be there for sure. And are you gonna be there? Anything else that you want to add
I
on the
may
banquet?
not. The last
Okay.
the last 3 years, it's conflicted with I have to ASU's governing board meetings they've been on the same day, excuse me, out of town. So we have a table. I told my team to save me a seat just in case I can make it back in town. For the last 2 years, I haven't been able to. Excuse me.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
Yeah.
So, okay, no worries at all. I think that's it. I don't know if Luan has any other question.
No, I don't have anything else except to thank you, Lisa, for taking the time to talk to us.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
And thank you so much, Lisa. We really appreciate this. Thank you so much. Sorry, I hope you're okay.
Yeah, I just got something caught in my throat.
Okay.
But thank you. All righty.
Thank you. Have a nice day. Thank you so
You too.
much. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Okay. All right. Bye-bye. Bye.